In this video, we will learn how to know the residential status of an individual as per Income Tax Act 1961. The residential status of an individual is defined under Section 6 subsection 1. An individual can become either resident of India or non-resident of India. There is no third option. If an individual wants to become resident of India, he will have to fulfill the basic condition. There are two basic conditions: first basic condition and second basic condition. This both the basic condition is an option. You can fulfill either first or second, but initially you will have to check the first basic condition, then only you can go for the second basic condition. You cannot jump directly on second basic condition. But if you're going for second basic condition, there are two parts in second basic condition, part A and part B. You will have to fulfill both. It is not an option, it is mandatory for you to fulfill both the part of second basic condition. So let us try to understand the first basic condition. The first basic condition is residing 182 days or more in India during previous year. Our previous year is 2016-17. So in 16-17 you will have to stay in India for a minimum period of 182 days. If you are staying in India for a minimum period of 182 days in the year 2016-17, then you will become resident of India. If you are not able to fulfill this first basic condition, then you have one more option, that is second basic condition. But if you are going for second basic condition, you will have to fulfill both the part of second basic condition. So let us understand the first part of second basic condition. Residing 60 days or more in India during previous year. You cannot stay for 182 days, but at least stay for 60 days. 182 days is approx 6 months. 60 days is approx 2 months. So that is manageable. So the first part of second basic condition says you will have to stay in India for a minimum period of 60 days in the previous year. Along with this, you will have to fulfill the second part. And the second part is residing 365 days or more in India during 4 preceding previous year. Now what is preceding previous year? The year immediately preceding, or in fact I can say all the year preceding the previous year will be termed as an preceding previous year. So our previous year is 2016-17. That means all the year before 2016-17 will be termed as an preceding previous year. So what the second part says, you will have to stay in India for a minimum period of 365 days during the 4 preceding previous year. So if you fulfill both the part of second basic condition, you will become resident of India. So when an individual can become resident of India? If he fulfills either of these basic condition, either 182 days or more, or 60 days or more, and 365 days or more. If you fulfill any of these basic condition, you will become resident of India. If you do not fulfill any of this condition, then you will become non-resident of India. Now wherever we have section, act, law, for each and every section, act, law, we have exceptions. Hence, for this section, that is section 6 subsection 1, we have an exception. It is exception to section 6 subsection 1. There are two exceptions, first exception, second exception. So first exception says Indian citizen leaves India during the previous year. Now you are an Indian citizen. What is important in this exception is that you are an Indian citizen. and you are living in India during the previous year for employment outside India. Now, if you talk about employment, there are two possibilities, either for taking an employment or for the purpose of employment. Now, what is the difference between for taking an employment terms and for the purpose of employment? For taking an employment means you are living India, you are getting an employment, a job outside India. So permanently you will leave India and you will stay in the foreign country for the job. And what do you mean by for the purpose of employment? You are on official tour or you got some project in the foreign country for a month or maybe for 2 months or for 6 months. So you will complete that project and again you will come back to India. So that is for the purpose of employment. So in case of purpose of employment, you are not completely leaving India. So I hope you have understood the difference between for taking an employment and for the purpose of employment. The second part of first exception is as a member of shipping crew. So if you are an Indian citizen, you are leaving India during the previous year as a member of shipping crew, so you are following an exception. So the first exception says Indian citizen leaves India during previous year either for employment outside India or as a member of shipping crew. Second exception, a person of Indian origin residing outside visits India during the previous year. Now, what do you mean by Indian origin? Born in India, brought up somewhere else. Suppose if you are not born in India, either of your parents are born in India, still you are a person of Indian origin. Let us assume even your parents are not born in India, still you can become a person of Indian origin. Condition if either of your grandparents are born in India. So you are a person of Indian origin, you are residing outside, definitely you will reside outside, visits India during the previous year, then you are following an exception. Now in both the exception, if you see, they are talking about Indian. In the first exception, they are talking about Indian citizen, and in the second exception, they are talking about Indian origin. So if you are a foreign citizen, you will not fall in this exception. What will happen if you fall in this exception? If you fall in this exception and you want to become resident of India, then it is compulsory for you to fulfill the first basic condition. You will not get the option of second basic condition. That means if you want to become resident of India, mandatory you will have to stay in India for a minimum period of 182 days. Why? Because you are following an exception, and as you are following an exception, you will not get the option of second basic condition, that is 60 days in the previous year and 365 days in the four preceding previous year. Okay, now what is next? Once you become resident of India, what is the next step? Once you become resident of India, further we will have to find out whether you are resident and ordinary resident or resident but not ordinary resident. By the way, why do we understand about all this thing? Resident of India, non-resident of India, resident and ordinary resident, resident but not ordinary resident. Why should we learn all this thing? The whole thing ends up with the tax. The tax liability will differ for each and every residential status. For resident and ordinary resident, the tax liability or the taxable income will be different from the resident but not ordinary resident. The tax liability of NRI will differ, or taxable income will differ with the resident and ordinary resident or resident but not ordinary resident. So unless we know whether you are resident and ordinary resident, resident but not ordinary resident, or non-resident of India, it will be impossible for us to calculate your taxable income. Thus, this residential status is very important. Now, coming back to this point, if you want to become resident and ordinary resident, you will have to fulfill the additional condition. There are two additional conditions, additional condition number 1, additional condition number 2. It is not an option. It is compulsory for you to fulfill both the additional condition. So what is the first additional condition? Residing 730 days or more in India during 7 preceding previous year. So in 7 preceding previous year, you will have to stay in India for a minimum period of 730 days. Then what is the second additional condition? Must be a resident of India in at least 2 out of 10 preceding previous year. How to find out resident of India? Then you will have to go back for this basic condition. With the help of basic condition, you will come to know about the residential status of an individual, whether he is resident of India or non-resident of India. So if you fulfill the basic condition, you will become resident of India. If you are not able to fulfill the basic condition, you will become non-resident of India. So second additional condition says you should be resident of India in at least 2 out of 10 preceding previous year. So if you fulfill both the additional condition, you will become resident and ordinary resident. If you do not fulfill both, or if you fulfill only one of this additional condition, you will become resident but not ordinary resident. There are a few steps which we are supposed to follow for calculating the residential status of an individual. The first step is introduction. You will have to introduce the person of whose you are calculating, or of an individual of whose you are calculating the residential status, whether he is an Indian citizen or foreign citizen, whether exception is applicable to him or not applicable to him. So all this thing you will have to mention in the introduction. Second step, basic condition. Those two basic conditions, that is residing 182 days or more in India during previous year, or residing 60 days or more in India during previous year, and residing 365 days or more in India during 4 preceding previous year, you will have to mention it here. In the third step, you will have to calculate and check whether he is fulfilling the basic condition or not. In the fourth step, you will have to explain the calculation of third step. Actually, for how many days he was in India, whether he was in India for 182 days or not, if not 182 days, whether he was in India for 60 days or not, whether he was in India for 365 days or not in the 4 preceding previous year. All this thing you will have to explain in this step. Now here in this step, you will come to know whether he is resident of India or non-resident of India. Suppose if he becomes resident of India, then you will have to go for the new paragraph. Next step. Now here you will have to mention, as he becomes resident of India, now further we will have to find out whether he is resident and ordinary resident, or resident but not ordinary resident. In the next step, you will have to mention both the additional condition, that is residing 730 days or more in India during 7 preceding previous year, and must be a resident of India in at least 2 out of 10 preceding previous year. In the next step, you will have to calculate and check whether he is fulfilling the additional condition or not. Eighth step, you will have to explain the calculation of seventh step. Now in here in the explanation, you will have to actually give the number. He was in India for 730 days in the 7 preceding previous year or not. Whether he is resident of India in at least 2 out of 10 preceding previous year or not. All this thing, the actual data you will have to give in this step. And the last step, conclusion. Now here you will have to conclude whether he is resident and ordinary resident, or resident but not ordinary resident. If you are following all these steps from step number 1 to 9, then your conclusion cannot be non-resident of India. Why? Now, why we are going for fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth step? Because he became resident of India. So here you are saying that he became resident of India, and in conclusion you are saying that he is non-resident of India. So it will be wrong. So if you're following all these steps, your conclusion should be either resident and ordinary resident, or resident but not ordinary resident. It cannot be non-resident of India. Okay, so what will happen if you come to know that he is NRI in this step? Here in this step, if you come to know that he is NRI, then directly you will have to jump on conclusion number 9. Then you will have to skip step number 5, 6, 7, and 8 because it is not required. This 5 to 8 is required if he becomes resident of India. So in that case, your conclusion will be Mr. So and so is non-resident of India. So these are the 9 steps which we are supposed to follow for calculating the residential status of an individual. There are few important points which are related to individual. The first, in case of non-resident of India, ignore step number 5 to step number 8. This I have already explained you in the previous slide. Next point, the day of arrival to India and the day of departure from India is to be considered in India. So both the day of arrival and the day of departure, both you will have to consider in India. For example, suppose if he is arriving in India in the night at 11:45 p.m., then you will have to assume that whole day he was in India. And same for the departure also. Suppose if he is departing from India early in the morning, let's say around 1 o'clock in the morning. So again, in this case, even though he was not in India, you will have to assume that the day from the day on which he departed, he was in India. Next point, a person may be resident in 2 or more countries at the same time. A person can be a resident of 2 countries at the same time. For example, in uh, as per Income Tax Act for India, if you want to become resident of India, you will have to fulfill the basic condition. And if you see the second basic condition, it says residing 60 days or more. So you stay in India for a minimum period of 60 days and fulfill 365 days or more in 4 preceding previous year. So 60 days in India, and suppose in any other country if the condition is, let's say, for 45 days, so you can be 60, you can be resident of India as well as resident of that particular company, because you can fulfill both the conditions. Here you can stay in India for a 60 days, and there you can go and stay for 45 days. So you can be resident of 2 or more countries, but you cannot be a citizen of 2 different countries. So let me repeat this sentence. You can be a resident of 2 or more countries, but you cannot be a citizen of 2 different countries. Citizenship you will get only of one country. Next point, it is not essential that the stay should be at the same place. Of course, say if you are coming to Mumbai, it is not mandatory for you to stay in Mumbai only. Stay in Mumbai for 182 days, then only you leave. Otherwise, you will become non-resident of India. No, it is not like that. You can go to Kerala, then you can go to Jammu, you can go to Assam, you can travel any place in India, but you will have to be in India. The total number of days you will have to fulfill in India. Next point, it is equally not necessary that stay should be continuous. Now the condition says residing 182 days or more in India during previous year. That doesn't mean that you once you arrive in India, you will have to stay in India for a minimum period of 182 days. Then only you can leave. It's not like that. You can take a break. Let's say, suppose if you're coming in the month of April, then again go back to your country in the month of May. Again come back to India in the month of June. Again go back to your country July. You can take a break, but total number of days in India should be 182 days. Or if you're going for second basic condition, it should be 60 days. Next point, the place of stay or the purpose of stay is not material. Why you're coming to India, that is not important for income tax. Thank you.